In this video, we're going to be discussing the common types of testing. Now, these are just the testing types that you'll encounter probably regularly, and they're by no means exhaustive. We're just going to go over a few of them and just kind of break them down so as you hear the terms, especially if you're new into getting into QA, you may hear these terms and you may or may not know the complete definition of them. And again, the definition I'm giving is kind of just a generalized definition. And then we'll discuss a little bit in detail when we get into setting up like test plans and test suites, why these come into consideration for organizing and setting that up. Now, as I said, these aren't going to be exhaustive by no means. Some of them may have, sometimes the names of them get a little intermixed. Like I'll hear people say regression testing, and what they really mean is retesting. And there is a difference between regression and retesting. And an example, regression is kind of testing areas that aren't affected by what you're currently working on. So you want to go back and regression test those areas to make sure that all this new stuff or updates or new features haven't broken anything over there. And the expectation is it has not, and it shouldn't have touched it at all, but you still want to run through a test for your release. It's kind of like a safeguard, just to ensure, The other is one I hear quite a bit is smoke insanity testing. And those have even like a smaller difference. And honestly, unless you're some kind of, QA police, you understand what they mean, you understand what they say, and you just kind of just let that go, But I think it's good to, as a QA person, to know the different terms and that. So when you're writing up documentation and things of that nature, whenever you're referring to these testing types, you're putting them in the proper context. And I think that's probably more important for QA people than other types. Okay, so let's start off with the two main ones. And these are terms you don't hear often. You would definitely won't hear them in all companies. And again, all companies use bits and pieces of these. Some don't. They have their own way of testing things. And I always recommend, when you go into a new company, and especially if you're a new tester or even just going to a new company, kind of hang out for a little bit and see the way they're doing things, and then try to figure out why they're doing things like this. So you may come and say, well, I know that's not really a good way to go down that road, but there may be a historical reason why they are going down that way, going down that road. They may have tried other ways of doing stuff, and it just wasn't a good fit for them. So sometimes, the wheel may be a little squeaky, but just it's not bad yet. Or it's like that because there's it has to be that way. There's reasons we don't know why. Okay, so the first two I'd like to get into is what's called M.A.T.S and B.A.T.S. And these are acronyms. They're M.A.T.S and B.A.T.S. And one is Minimal Acceptance Testing, M.A.T.S, and the other is Build Acceptance Testing, B.A.T.S. And these tests they're pretty much what they the acronym pretty much describes what they are. For your M.A.T.S testing, Minimal Acceptance Testing, that is kind of a test that you'll have. Let's say you're on you're getting ready to release. There were some issues coming out the week prior, and maybe they were kind of heavy duty, and they were they got them resolved and fixed, and now but you've still got that release date you have to hit. So you have to decide, well, what test do we need to run to absolutely positively these have to pass to go out. That's the minimal acceptance that we can do for the release. And so you go in from all the tests you have and all the sections and areas you have, and you determine, okay, we've got all of our functional tests over here. Well, we don't have to check every test down to, proper messaging and grammar and things of that nature. But we do need to test this, and this, and especially these areas that we know were around where the bugs were discovered. and that's what you kind of define as M.A.T.S. So M.A.T.S isn't really test cases that you write out. You can, but they're mainly from pre-existing tests. You just go kind of through all your tests and go, okay, of these 150 functional tests we have, 25 of them are really, really critical that, these cannot not pass before we send it out. And the same for all your other sections, your integration test and your system testing, even maybe some of your UI testing. You want to say, hey, of all of our tests, we've marked these percentage that have to go. And that's why you see it says minimal acceptance testing. And so that way, when those pass, when dev comes to you or the stakeholders come to you and say, hey, how's it feeling on the QA side? Well, our minimal acceptance testing passed, meaning that we feel when you release this, when it hits the field or gets out to the customer, there may be issues because we weren't able to do full testing, but there should not be any issues around these areas that are critical and vital that, could, one, cause loss, data loss, and problems. Another thing on a lesser degree is, embarrass the QA department, You don't want to ever come back, have issues come back and go, QA, why didn't you catch that? And that can happen. And I'll tell you, it's not a good place to be, especially if you're kind of someone like me, a type A that, I don't like to make, we all make mistakes, but I don't like to make those obvious, call rookie mistakes, so to speak. Now, the second one I was discussing is B.A.T.S, Build Acceptance Test. Now, those are ones that when dev is finished, and the build acceptance testing is, I want to say, I see it in Agile every now and then, depending on the company, but it's really kind of an old holdover from the waterfall testing methodologies, or philosophy, I should say, the waterfall philosophy. Where everything's done, and then it's okay, we've got the build, all the development done. We're going to send the build now over to QA to start testing. And the B.A.T.S, the build acceptance testing system, was where when dev says, yeah, we're ready for you to start testing, so we go, okay, well, let us run through these. And they're going to be simple things like, installation tests, login tests, maybe kind of just clicking around at a high, like loading all pages, just to make sure there's not just a complete error on any page, especially a critical page. Maybe, if it's a shopping cart app and you just want to like error at the shopping cart. When you click, there's just no page load. You just get those back a hard HTML error. So the build acceptance test goes, okay, let us run that. You say, hey, we're going to give it to you on Wednesday. Okay. We'll get them on Wednesday, and by Wednesday evening, we'll take a day to run our test. And at that point, we have the option to kick it back, like not accept it, and say, hey, here's the problems we found. These need to be fixed before we can even accept it. And the reason you want to do that is you don't want to accept that build, start getting through it, and then all these bugs just start coming out. You start finding all these. And so, you've lost the day, or days, just doing your regular testing, and then you start hitting these bugs over in this one area, where if you'd kind of went that when you first got the build, like just kind of went over the whole app exclusively, you can go, oh crap, this whole area over here is just, it's just bug ridden. Okay. Well, then you can just get that back to dev and say, hey, yeah, we don't know what happened here, but this is not good. And then they can get started on it immediately, as opposed to the build being put out there and you're just sitting there doing your testing thinking, I've got 3 weeks, and you go through week 1, week 2, and then week 3, you get into that section. And now it's like, oh, well, the 2 weeks that we've tested, everything was fine. Now we're hitting all this, and we've got to send this build back to get it done. Well, that deadline to release is still there. Now, when a dev gets those issues resolved and it comes back for the second time, well, now you're going to have to go regress all those other ones for sure, just to make sure. So that's what the B.A.T.S testing is. Unit testing. Unit testing it kind of involves testing the individual components, And unit testing is usually performed kind of at the development level. Like the developer, as they're developing it, they'll write unit tests, but they're really just focused on the component and the items that they're working on. Especially if it's a component that says has several different options, they'll go through, yeah, all those options available. See if you click on them, they function. So it's kind of like a minimal. I don't say a minimal test, but they're not like all-encompassing tests, if you know what I mean. I mean, it's just kind of going like, hey, you go out, a unit test. Think of it like you're at the area you want to test the button, and you click on it, and you go, yep, I click on the button, and it's good. There's no test leading up into logging in and getting to that button or back. These are very direct and very granular testing. Then there's integration testing, and integration testing kind of is what it sounds like it is. You're making sure that everything that integrates with that product tests, whether it be third party or within the app itself or with any other in-house apps. So you'll make sure everything kind of is compatible and plays nice with each other. Functional testing, and functional testing will be your big one. That's the one that you'll be involved in that pretty much in any company you ever work for, QA, no matter how small or large they are. And functional testing just kind of verifies that it meets the specified requirements. So that's where the functional tests are kind of pulled for. So in your acceptance criteria or your business requirement, if you're working out of BRD's business requirement documents, the functional testing you kind of want to go through, and that's where you'll build your test case off of those. So when you write your test case, you may have steps 1 through 4 getting you up to where you're going to test the functional portion of this requirement, and then the preceding steps to be, kind of going through if you're doing like end-to-end scenarios. So think of it like, hey, I log in, I click here, I click here, I click here, I get to this area. Now this is where the requirements are around this component or what have you. Now this is where I take and I write my functional test and make sure that it functions to that specification. Now in here you can have some offshoots or some other types of testing that come in at functional testing, which is boundary testing, meaning let's say it's an account number for a banking institution, an account number text box, and the function is it requires 9 digits to go, and then when the 9 digits, when you hit submit, it puts those 9 digits in this table in this column in the database. Okay, so that's your functional requirement. But the offshoot is like your boundary testing. Okay, well, what happens if I try to put a letter in here, or if I put a letter in here? So if I do 8 digits in a letter, can I exceed the 9-digit requirement? If I exceed that, what happens? Does it write to the database? Does it truncate? Does it not allow it? If I'm typing in that text box and I hit like 9 digits, does it just go? It just stops typing at that point. So let's say the account number was the 012345678 So if I'm typing in there and I hit 011234567 should it stop there, or should it also allow the 9? You see, will any special characters go in there? So you have boundary and the special characters and stuff. You get kind of into what's called negative testing. Like, okay, I know it's supposed to go in this text box, but what happens if I try to put other things in? Will it allow it? If it does allow it and I hit submit, what happens? Does it error? Does it just take it and then I go out and look in the database? I go out and run my SQL scripts, and I look in the database and it's like, oh, there it is, special character. Okay, so let's say it accepts that special character. Now if I go over to reports, does that account number come out at reports, or does the report get an error because it goes, I'm expecting numeric only, and only 9 placeholders, and there's ampersands and all kinds of things here, and I don't know what to do with, so I error. So that's why it's thorough to go through these things. And when we get into the test planning, the test coverage, and laying out your test plan, that's when things like this will really come into play. And here's the next big one that you'll get into is regression testing. Regression testing is probably pretty much any company you ever work for as in the capacity of a software quality assurance. Whether it's manual or automation testing, you'll be dealing a lot with regression testing. Now, regression testing is really there to ensure that recent changes are not affecting other parts of the application or the product. Those two words can be used interchangeably. Meaning that, and we'll use the agile version. You're in sprint number 3, and you've got sprint 1, sprint 2 down. You've run the tests for all those. Everything's looking good. Now you've got sprint 3 coming out. It's adding to the functionality that you've already built out in the other sprints, or it's something new and has nothing to do with the other 2 sprints at all. It's new functionality coming in. Well, you want to have your set of regression tests to go back and say, okay, well, let's go back and test things that weren't affected by this to make sure they're still working properly. And that could be both for if it's new functionality and hey, it's not going to affect y'all because it's not even involved with it. It has nothing to do with this one. And it could be, well, there was things added to it, but any of the other stuff shouldn't be affected at all. But if you're any experienced with development, sometimes in development they have what's called OOP, object-oriented programming, and or PI is another one, polymorphism, inheritance, and encapsulation. And so what a lot of times when they're doing development, they share code or objects or methods or that. So like for a save button, if let's say you have a save button, a save link, a save what have you, they may only have one code that they call on every time to hit that. When you click the save, it all goes to the same thing because save always does the same thing. So every time you save whatever you're doing on a form, anything, whatever, what have you, when you hit save, let's say then it goes to the thank you very much landing page every time, same page, no matter what you do. When you hit save, it flips you over there. So instead of them writing out 5 different iterations of that, say there's 5 different ways you can save within the application, it takes you to the same one. Well, instead of writing 5 different methods or what have you for our functions for the code, they'll just use one and call it. Say, hey, when you hit save, start here, do this, and then the save function will have all its stuff coded in there to go. So they can call that. So now you can see where if they're writing a new feature or adding to a feature and it has a save button on it, even though your area wasn't affected, they are writing over files in the code repository, and mistakes happen. File could be checked out incorrectly, things of this nature. So that's why regression testing is very important. Regression testing really should be kind of done either periodically as you're going, definitely before you do a release, and just at various times throughout the release cycle. Sometimes when you're working in code, people, when they do sprints, they will have it from a cycle from the last release to this release. They say, okay, we're going to have 10 sprints before we release again, and this is the things we're going to squeeze in there. Well, during those 10 sprint segments, that's whenever you should be running your regression testing at some point. So, hey, sprint 2, regression, sprint 4, regression, sprint 8, regression, and then, of course, sprint 10, just do regression testing. Now, some people will, and not to be, mean here, but it's usually management folks, our product owners, product managers, they will interchange the word regression and retest. And they'll use regression when they mean retest. And retest is a little different than regression testing. Regression testing is to go to make sure nothing that was broken before is now broken because of new functionality. It shouldn't be touched. Retesting is, and it's mainly around whenever you're doing bug fixes and you're creating test cases for the new bugs coming in. So say you're in a sprint, they're putting in the bug fixes, you're creating the test cases, and you're retesting those bugs that came in. Okay, because sometimes you may have a bug that carries over 2 or 3 sprints, and we'll get more into that when we get into agile and waterfall stuff. But just be aware of that. But that's in essence what regression testing is, as opposed to retesting. So just remember that regression testing is just taking and kind of verifying what the other parts of the app, that the new functionality or existing functionality into functionality is not breaking stuff that you've already tested and have signed off on. You want to go back and make sure, hey, is everything okay? We didn't break anything. And how things do get broken a lot is during the check-in process, especially if you're on a team with multiple developers and working on the same code repository. They may make mistakes of like not checking out or overwriting, or not, end of the day they're tired, they just hit and it says, hey, you want to overwrite this file? Yeah, boom, but they didn't mean to overwrite that file. So the generally though, the code repository has good checks and balances to kind of minimize that, but it still does happen. So that's why you always want to check that. Or it could be something they put in the new functionality now breaks things that was over there, the third party thing that the existing code was kind of looking for, relying on, and it changed it. Maybe they had to update a third party utility, which now broke the existing ones. Okay, so that's a little long-winded, but kind of the essence of regression testing. All right, next up is performance testing. And performance testing is pretty much what it sounds like. You want to check the performance, and with that, you'll hear the term if you start getting into performance testing of the system under load. And there are softwares. I know Microsoft Visual Studio had built a utility that was an actual performance testing component to it. I did a little bit of that at the company I was with, and what it did was it kind of was like automation, meaning that you'd go through and you would do certain things, but it was a little different because it was a proprietary language. Well, I shouldn't say proprietary, but it was a language that it wasn't like you could go run Selenium scripts or have the performance tester use the Selenium scripts. But what it would do was you'd write up and say, hey, I want you to go through and do these things, like end to end, like log in, go out, buy some stocks, make a bank account, what have you, and then log out. And so you kind of get that in the language that it had. And you say, okay, I want you to do that, but now I want you to simulate 25, 50, 100 users doing this at the same time. So that way, then you wanted to see how the system responds to that. Because a lot of times we can get caught up to where, hey, we're working this, building it out, but we're on these servers where maybe just the team's hitting that server. So you got 5, maybe 10, maybe 20 users. Server doesn't have any problem with that. But now you get it out in the real world, out in the field, and then it's got 500,000 users hitting it daily, doing things. So you want to make sure that application can keep up, is not getting all bogged down with different things. And I know when I was working at this company where I was doing the performance testing, they didn't have separate servers for the performance testing. So when I'd go to run it, I'd have to send out an email to everyone and said, hey, I'm getting ready to kick off some performance testing, so now's a good time to go to lunch. or if you start experiencing slowness and stuff like that, note that I'm kicking these off. And they a lot of people come in and say, wow, you can really tell the difference when you're running those things. And then the same vein, I let them know, hey, I'm done for the day, so things would speed back up. So with performance testing, that's probably one of the most overlooked areas, or not as much importance put on it as far as actually like setting out a test plan and a test scope for performance, which it should be. Now, I know some companies that may not be true, but for some of your smaller companies, it is, and it really should be. And the couple that I've used, Load Runner was one, and I think it was open source, and then of course Microsoft had its own. But I really encourage you, and if you are in a position where you kind of give recommendations, that is to recommend doing performance testing, because especially if you're building a web application, you never know now or in the future how much volume you're going to have on that. And kind of the recommended thing is to have the pages load within 2 seconds, complete page loads. That's the desired results. And with performance testing, you can see if you are within those specifications. I'm going to kind of wrap this up. This is going to be our part 1 of the common testing types, or types of testing. So join us on the second one, and we're going to cover some more areas. These common testing types can be long. I'm just using the common ones, but I think they're just good to kind of have a good foundation in each one, so you can see what really is there to serve your needs. Okay, so wrap this up. See you on the next one. Thank you for watching.